This is going to be a ranking of all the Misfits fights from Misfits 01 to Misfits 08. As of today, Misfits 09 will be happening, so this list will be updated once that fight has concluded. Starting right off with Misfits 01, which honestly was a great event. Have a lot of future stars in there like Salt Poppy, Dean the Grey, King Kenny, and a ton of recurring fighters that we've seen throughout all the Misfits events. The fights individually were also really good. Deji vs. Fuzi was amazing. FaZe Temper vs. Slim was a great upset. Salt Poppy vs. Andy Jaworski is arguably the most vicious knockout on Misfits so far. And of course, we have KSI's return after about a 3-year layoff, so that was another part of it that was great to watch. Some parts of this event weren't that great. Faye Sensei getting robbed was really upsetting. Also, both of KSI's fights were probably the worst fights on the card. Overall, I give Misfits 01 an 8 out of 10. Good card, good fights, overall a good event. Misfits 02. This one was when we first realized that Misfits is going to have these filler cards where there'll be a couple, bigger names here and there, but they're definitely not going to be as big as like KSI events. Most of the fights on here were pretty boring. JMX vs. Ginty wasn't all that good. Halal Ham vs. DTG wasn't that great. We also have what I argue to be one of the worst fights on Misfits, which was Astrid Wet vs. Keeley. Not all the fights were bad though. Ashley Roxy vs. Anthony Taylor was a solid fight. We also obviously had Slim vs. Ryan Taylor, which low-key carried the card, and Jay Swingler vs. Churdleys. While it wasn't a really long fight and wasn't super entertaining, it was good to see Jay Swingler being an up-and-coming star. Overall, I give Misfits 02 a 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't an awful event, but I think especially with how high our expectations were after the first event, this second event was a bit of a letdown. Next up is Misfits 03. I've been looking at some people's rankings of these fights, and people are putting Misfits 03 criminally low. Don't get me wrong, some of the fights were bad. Josh Bruckner vs. Chase Demore, while funny, was just kind of boring. Also, Minicon vs. Nick Paddywhack, they both got really tired really quickly, so that got boring too. But some of the fights on here were pretty good. Ice Poseidon vs. Brandon Buckingham, I think, is an underrated fight. It was really fun. FaZe Temper having a quick knockout. King Kenny finally getting a win that people weren't going to argue about. And then we have the main event, which in my opinion is the best Misfits fight of all time. Wally Shark starting out strong, dominating the entire fight, having technically three knockdowns, and looking like he's going to absolutely win the fight easily. And then out of nowhere, Dean comes in with the right hand and puts him down. Overall, I give Misfits 03 a 7.5 out of 10. It was definitely a way better card than I think a lot of people expected, and there were great fights. Obviously, Wally Sharks and Dean carried it, but I think it was overall a way better event than people give it credit for. Next up with Misfits 04, I do not think there was a single bad fight on this card. Starting off strong with Anthony Taylor versus Idris Virgo, and then having other really good fights. Swarms and Pineda both came back and both won their fights. Salt Poppy having a dominant performance over Josh Bruckner. Slim and Tom Zanetti going to war. And obviously we have KSI's knockout over FaZe Temper. Let's also not forget Elbrook versus Faith Ordway, undoubtedly the best female fight on Misfits so far. Overall, I give Misfits 04 a 9 out of 10. Nothing really went wrong with the event. All the fights were good, and it was just a super fun event to watch. Next up, we have Misfits 05, which I think could have been the best filler card if it wasn't for one fight. Tempo vs. Godson was definitely a fun start to the event. I'm definitely excited to see Tempo fight Chase Demore on the Prime card. We had our first tag team event with Pineda and B-Dave versus Ice Poseidon and Vargas, and I think this was a very good fight to show how fun tag team boxing would be to watch. Big upset from Roxu as well, defeating King Kenny because King Kenny just at the time couldn't throw a punch. And for the main event, you had Jay Swingler versus Nick LMAO. Super close, super competitive, and personally I rate it really highly because the crowd energy was just there. It was such a high energy in the crowd. They were screaming, they were roaring every time Jay threw a punch. It was crazy, and it just made the fight way more fun. Now, like I said, I think this could have been the best filler card in Misfits, except for one fight. Y'all already know which one I'm talking about. It's Halal Ham versus Ginty, and dude, why did these two do what they did? They didn't do anything. It's crazy to think that at that point, Halal had been training for 3 to 4 years and couldn't throw a punch against Ginty. The only reason Ginty even won the fight was because he got the luckiest knockout of his life when Halal Ham just decided to bum rush him, and he just kind of tapped him on this chin and he just decided to fall down. Overall, I rate Misfits 05 a 7 out of 10. Most of the card was good, but Halal, Ham, and Ginty just dragged it down a lot for me. Now, I haven't revealed my list fully yet, and I'll do that at the end of the video so you can visually see how I ranked all my fights, but I don't think I gotta tell y'all that Misfits 06 ranks at the bottom. Don't get me wrong, some of the fights were good, you know, Wally Sharks vs. iPop was solid, Chris Avila vs. Paul Bamba was solid, but there was just so much that went wrong with this event. We had Chase Demore ruining what could have been his first win because he couldn't stop punching Stevie Knight when he was down, Slice Jr. vs. OJ Rose with a super early stoppage. Also, the crowd, there was no one there. The energy was dead. Also, y'all can't tell me Uncle Pizza isn't like an industry plan. This dude came out of nowhere. Like, I have to assume they went to some boxing gym, found a dude who had been boxing for like a year or two, and was just like, hey, do you like pizza? Are you an uncle? Okay, we gotta fight for you. Overall, I give Misfits an 06. Crowd energy was dead. Most of the fights were kind of boring. And overall, just nothing really went super well for this event. Next up is Misfits 07. I'm not going to talk about the prelims on this fight because honestly, who cared about the prelims? Both of the female fights on here were pretty solid. Not the best, but they were fun to watch. There were some pretty good fights on here. Deji vs. Storms was pretty good. DK Money vs. Virus was a super fun fight to watch, and especially with the way it went, it was really good. Granted, Virus was on roids. Saul Poppy versus Anthony Taylor was kind of a letdown for me. Like, Anthony Taylor definitely deserved his win, but like, it was just kind of boring. And I mean, he did what he had to do to win, but the way he had to win was just by hugging Salt the entire time, and it just, you know, it wasn't a bad fight, but it kind of made the fight boring. And then we have KSI versus Joe. And it wasn't a bad fight, you know, KSI did what he had to do. He fought kind of well. I don't really like him doing karate stance the entire time, but it was a solid fight. Overall, I give Misfits 07 a 7.5 out of 10. Not a bad event. It was pretty fun, but there were a couple things that just drag it down a little bit. Now we're at the most recent event, which was Misfits 08. And I gotta be honest with y'all, this event was just kind of weird. Initially, Mams and KSI were hyping this up to like break the internet and it's gonna be crazy, but from what we can tell and from what Mams was saying, there must have been a ton of pullouts behind the scene because the end product was definitely lackluster. And even then, as we were approaching the fight, there were even more pullouts to the point where we had Alan Belcher, the champion of his division in bare knuckle boxing, fighting Chase Demore. How does that happen? Also, Paul Bamba versus Anthony Taylor got canceled the day of the event. I honestly think that would have been the best fight of Misfits 08, but for it to get canceled the day of is just so weird. And because of everything that happened, if you exclude the prelims, because nobody cares about the prelims, there were only 4 fights on the card. Now, even though there weren't many fights, none of the fights were really all that bad. The AK guy had a solid win over James Sellers. Chase Demore and Alan Belcher was honestly a fun fight to watch up until Chase kind of just gave up. Dean the Great with Wally Sharks versus Udigang TV and iPop was also a very fun tag team event, and also just builds up the Dean versus Waleed rematch even more. And then we had our first Survivor tag, which I think could be good. There just needs to be a couple tweaks on it. Like, this definitely should have been a 6-round fight. Honestly, I think it could have been an 8-round fight. Overall, I give Misfits 08 a 6 out of 10. I don't even think this fight being kind of bad, it was the fault of Mams Taylor or anyone on Misfits. There were just a ton of pullouts and it just kind of got unlucky. So now we're done talking about all the Misfits events. Let's put all of them in my official rankings. At number 8, we have Misfits 06 being 5 out of 10 and being the worst. At number 7, we have Misfits 08 with a 6 out of 10. At number 6, we have Misfits 02 with a 6.5 out of 10. At number 5, we have Misfits 05 with a 7 out of 10. Misfits 07 and Misfits 03 are tied with 7.5 out of 10. Then we have Misfits 01, which is an 8 out of 10. And then in first place, being the best Misfits event so far, we have Misfits 04. I'm definitely excited for Misfits 09 and the Prime card. Honestly, if no one pulls out of the Prime card, I think it's an easy prediction to say that it will be the best Misfits event. So if any of the fighters on Misfits are watching this, for the love of God, please don't pull out.